Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third session of our Parent Teacher Collaboration webinar series. For our discussion this afternoon, the topic would be on establishing educational discipline in homeschooling. To introduce our speaker, she is a recipient of international and national awards, among which are Fulbright Doctoral Dissertation Scholarship in the US, International Leaders in Education Program in the US, Amazing Minds in Southeast Asia, one of Yahoo Philippines' most inspiring educators in the news, Peraa's most outstanding teacher, and Metrobank's outstanding teacher of the Philippines in 2010. Her primary research focus is on integration of current and emerging technology tools and application into high school and university instructions to enhance teaching. Her doctoral dissertation is titled The Efficiency in WebQuest: Its Implications to Students' Critical Thinking Skills. She is a prolific speaker and presenter with a clientele that includes global, government agencies in the Philippines, and private sector firms on topics about leadership in the 21st century, improving office productivity, educational leadership, teacher training, classroom management, technology in education, interpersonal communications, personal effectiveness, project management, effective communication, speech, and public speaking. In the Philippines, she has given trainings and talks to DepEd, DPWH, DOH, OWA, DSWD, Philippine Army, DOLE, Population Commission, Philippine Parts Authority, Philippine Public Safety, Philippine National Volunteers Commission, among others. Her international audiences include those in Japan, Macau, Vietnam, Australia, Kent State University in Ohio, India, and San Diego, California. At present, she is the proprietor of MJL Review and Training Services, which provides reviews for IELTS, OET, LET, and Civil Service. The president of the Network of Outstanding Teachers and Educators, Northern Mindanao Chapter. A professor at the Graduate School of Capital University, a life coach, and a thesis and dissertation advisor and editor. Without further ado, let me introduce to you our speaker for this afternoon, Dr. Marcelita Handayan Labial.
Thank you very much, Miss Kia. Are you seeing my slide now? Miss Kia, are you seeing it?
Not yet po, ma'am.
Oh, hold
Let's
on.
share the screen po.
Hold on. Sandali, ha? Okay. This time you can see it now, Miss Kia.
Yes po, ma'am.
All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, of course, Miss Kia. Good afternoon, those who are watching Vibal Group, and we have our Suki viewers, right? And both on FB and YouTube. So welcome to this afternoon session. We have teachers here who are watching, and I understand we also have parents who are watching our session this afternoon. So my topic is about establishing educational discipline in homeschooling. Now, before I begin with my talk, let me give you a backgrounder on my profession. So, as what was mentioned by Miss Kia, of course, I'm a teacher, and for 26 years, I have been into teaching. And in the span of 26 years, I have been instrumental in producing productive members of our society. So I already have former students who are doctors, nurses, engineers, entrepreneurs, and whatnot. So, in other words, when we talk about educational discipline, I already have milestones, or I already have a wider experience in terms of educational discipline, which I believe which I believe is very helpful if you are a parent who will be homeschooling your child or your learner, or if you are a teacher who will be assisting our parents in homeschooling. So this session will be beneficial for you. All right, so in this talk this afternoon, there are two key points that I will tackle. First is about homeschooling, and the second one is about educational discipline. So here we go. What is homeschooling? So before the pandemic, our definition of homeschooling is it is a progressive movement around the country, okay, or around the world, in which parents educate their children at home instead of sending them to a traditional public or private school. So before the pandemic, we had this reasons, no, for parents in homeschooling their child or their learner. We can have the desire, no? It's the desire of the parents to really homeschool their child, and they also have this dedication as one of the reasons for them to send their child to homeschool. Dedication meaning their dedication to teach their children. Some groups or some parents prefer to have homeschooling because of their religious affiliation or their preference, and even our celebrities, they already go for homeschooling. Okay, you must know about the Kramer, si Cheska and Shamsi Supsup, I think, is also homeschooling her daughter. So that was before. It's more of you choose to homeschool your child. That was the definition of homeschooling before the pandemic. But now that we are in a crisis in which we almost have no choice but really have the learning take place at home because we cannot have face to face classes. So it's like there's no choice but you really have to have homeschooling. It may not be the homeschooling that we knew of before, because we have kind of with this crisis we have a new view of what homeschooling is. Okay, so there are lots of methods of homeschooling. No, I'm just showing you some of the methods in which, um, in the first definition that I showed you, if you choose to have homeschooling, you can combine all the methods. That's up to you. Or it depends on where you are homeschooling your child. There are homeschool providers here in the Philippines, and these are DepEd accredited, no? But if you do not want to go to a provider also, you can have independent homeschooling, which is a track wherein you just follow the DepEd curriculum, and then when it's time for you to, if you want your child to go on a formal schooling, you can have the Philippine Educational Placement Test, or the PEPT, um, and you go for accreditation and equivalency test or exam under the alternative learning system so that your child will be placed. That's the independent track now. Okay, not really enrolling to a to a homeschool provider. Now, is this legal, or is there a legal basis for this, for homeschooling? Yes, there is. And this is Article 14, Section 1 of the Philippine Constitution, which states that we can establish and maintain a system of free public education in the elementary and high school levels without limiting the natural right of parents to rear their children. So that's the legal basis of homeschooling. All right, so now the second thing that I will tackle with you is discipline. So what is discipline? Okay, discipline is defined as the practice of teaching others to obey rules or norms by using punishment to correct unwanted behaviors. If you notice on my screen, I highlighted punishment there as red. I do not want to call it punishment because it will have a negative connotation, but I'll talk to you in detail later what this punishment meant. Okay, so in the dictionary definition, this is what you will see. All right. So, in a classroom, a teacher uses discipline to ensure routine is maintained, school rules are enforced, and the students are in a learning or safe learning environment. So, that's the reason why we have the discipline in the classroom. So, if you translate that to homeschooling, we establish rules in homeschooling in order that students will have a safe learning environment, and so that they will be able to maintain or follow certain routines. Moving on. So while the word discipline seems negative, the goal of using discipline is to teach students boundaries and limits to help students achieve personal and academic life goals. All right. So the first thing that we will have when we are homeschooling is the learning environment. Remember that these kids have, for example, you are have homeschooling an elementary student, probably a grade 4 learner. So from kinder to grade 3, the child has been used to coming to school and being in a learning environment, being in a school environment. And because of this crisis, we are taking the child to a new learning environment, which is the home. Again, because we have no choice but to stay home. Now, this is something new for the child, and therefore, we should help the child process that adjustment in the learning environment. So if you are homeschooling your child, then create a learning environment which is kind of similar to the school. okay, and wherein there is concentration and reflection that they can experience in your house or in your part of the house. So how should your learning environment look like, or how should your school room look like? So first, think of choosing a location. Okay, create a layout, create workstations. Now, choose a location. You cannot just have any part of your house as your school room. What I meant by choose a location is that location must be your kind of permanent area where you will have the teaching and learning process, because it is not also nice to be putting your school room in the living room where there are lots of distractions. So here we are trying to let our learners experience that although this is a different setting, but it has similarity to the usual classroom that they know of. Okay, so choose a location. Probably if you have like a separate room or a guest room that you can make use of as your school room, that would work. Or if you have a basement at home, or a certain corner that you can create as your school room, have that, okay? So that you will not be changing location every time you hold classes, okay? Because again, remember, if you keep on changing location, that would take time, okay? So that precious time that you devote changing places or moving from one place to another, you could have spent that uh, to teach, all right? Now create a layout. Layout meaning, for example, you're homeschooling three or four or two children or two students. Where would you put student A, learner B? So have that layout already, okay? And create workstations, okay? Workstations. Like if you are having the art class, where will the workstation be? If you are into writing, will they be using the end part or the middle part of the room that you have chosen? Okay, so that's on you. And build a homeschool library so that the things will not be scattered. The books will be in one place. When they need the book, they can just simply pull it out from the shelf. So have that homeschool life. It doesn't have to be fancy, or it doesn't have to be very what do you call this, it doesn't have to be close to that of your school library. So long as you have a place, a nice place where you can place where you can put the books and other materials, reading materials or other resources, then that would work. Create storage and archival areas, okay, so that it's easy for them to retrieve things when they need them. Then if you can, if it allows, no, if your setting allows, you may have computer and internet connection. If you are into blended learning, if you go for blended learning, then it's necessary that you have computer and internet. Okay. And then you may also add audiovisual equipment like the projector. Okay. That's up to you. The ones in green that I included here, these are just optional. Okay. So others you can you should have those five others, and the two that's optional. All right, so in other words, have all the necessary learning tools inside, so that again you will not be spending much time in looking for the pens, looking for the books, the scissors, and all that when you need them. So again, we have to be conscious of how we are using and managing time. Okay. All right. So now, if you have already set the place for your homeschooling, the next question is, if you are the teacher, you are the mother, and you will be facilitating learning, or if you are the father and you're facilitating learning, or if you are the aunt or the uncle or whoever who will be facilitating learning, the question that you will ask is, how capable am I to facilitate learning? Okay. Questions like, how physically capable are you? Will you really be there during a scheduled teaching for English, for science, for math? How is your work? If you are working, like, uh, if you have a flexible schedule also, how much of your physical time can you really devote for the teaching or for the homeschooling? Okay. And another also is, how is your academic capability, or should I say intellectual capacity? Do you have the capacity to facilitate learning? Would you understand the modules that are being given to the students for them to tackle? Or if you are not capable of implementing the modules that your school or your teachers have given, then you may ask somebody who can help you. Okay? After all, we cannot know everything. No? Especially if you're homeschooling high school or senior high school, junior high school students, in which subjects are more complex and more difficult for us to understand. So those are questions that you need to ask. But I'd like to zero in on our emotional capacity. While it is true that we are masters of our thoughts, but sad to say, sad but true, that we are slaves of our emotions, whether you believe it or not. But based on experience, really our emotions play a big role really in disciplining or in facilitating learning. So the question that you need to ask is, how patient am I with children? How appreciative am I of the work of children? Or how generous am I in giving praises to the kids? So these are the questions that you will ask. In other words, when we are facilitating homeschooling, it necessitates a lot of time for introspection. You examine yourself. What am I capable of? What am I not capable of? For those that you are not capable of, you can ask the help of others. You can ask the teachers, you can ask your friends on how they do things, because again, um, we need the help of as many people as we can in order that we will not prevent the continuity of learning of the children. Okay. Now comes the tips that I will give you in establishing academic or educational discipline. So I'd like to focus on schools. Schools. I have 7 points to share with you today regarding establishing educational discipline. My talk will not be prescriptive or will not be directed to a certain uh, level. I'm not talking about tips for elementary, for prep, for high school. Okay, I will be speaking on general terms, and these points, these items which I will be sharing with you, are the items which I found helpful in making students succeed in the classroom, which I believe can be translated when we do homeschooling. So remember schools, schools. Let me begin with the S. What is this S? So the first one is set homeschool rules and clear expectations. If you want learners to be disciplined, there must be rules. Uh, we call that homeschool rules now because the setting of the learning has shifted to the home. So when you do homeschooling, you must have rules that are set in your homes. So rules like They should, for example, children should start studying or should start their English probably at 8 o'clock. Okay, so 30 minutes before 8 o'clock, they must have prepared themselves for the session. That can be a rule. Another rule that you can implement is if you are teaching your child to speak in English, then you can say, in the duration of our session for English, then I would expect that you would be speaking in pure English. There should be no code switching. That's a rule, okay? And you will also have rules like you should not be putting your gadgets inside, okay? When we begin with the learning or with the teaching, I do not want you to be putting your gadgets on the table. You should put them away, or you should not put snacks or whatever on the table while I am teaching. So you set the rules, okay, as parent or as teachers. So the rules must be very clear to the students, okay, and you should follow through those rules in order that uh, the children or your kids will really see the seriousness of the rules that you have established. Okay, let me talk about clear expectations. What are these clear expectations? Clear expectations, like when I was teaching in the high school before, I would, every session, I would put on the left side of the upper right hand side of our board the objectives for the day. Okay, so what was the purpose of having that? The purpose being that would remind them of what they will be achieving for that particular session. Okay, and that would also set their minds like, oh, okay, so we need to compose or we need to create 5 sentences today which are grammatically correct. So that is very clear to them. Or at the end of the lesson, I must be able to compute using blah blah blah, or I must be able to add 3-digit numbers, blah 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 blah. So it should be very clear. Okay, so set homeschool rules. And those rules, no, sabi nga ni Kim Chu, 'di ba? Sa classroom may batas, no? Bawal, pag sinabing bawal lumabas. Okay, so you know what rule to set in your homes, no? With your children. So those rules can be very specific to your setting. What what is applicable to me might not be applicable to you. So you identify what could be the possible rules that I will set for my children. Okay. So for the clear expectations, again, break it down into simpler terms. Okay. So like for today, what do you expect of them? Okay. Uh, are you expecting them to finish a particular poem, to understand a particular poem? Are you expecting them to work on a certain experiment according to the module? So it should be set as a clear expectation. Okay, so that's for our S. We go now for our C. What is the C? Create a homeschool schedule. Again, let us not take away from the learner's mind that they are in a learning environment, and or we are changing the location of a school to homeschool. So even if you are in a homeschool, still you establish a schedule. So what does the schedule look like? Again, you say Monday. What time will you be starting? Are you starting at 7:30 like the start of the usual school time? Are you starting at 8? What do you have from 8 to 9? 9 to 10, etc., etc. So have that schedule. this schedule also is related to what I mentioned earlier about the clear expectation. So they would expect that by Tuesday, this is how their schedule looks like. Wednesday, this is blah, blah, blah. And Thursday, they will be having sports, whatever that is. Okay. Again, that schedule is dependent on your availability also as a parent to facilitate learning. If you are a working parent, if you are working from home, probably instead of having 8 hours, you will be working like 4 hours, depending on how flexible your schedule at work is. Then uh, your schedule must jive with the schedule that you have made with your learner. Okay? So you can establish daily routine. What is this daily routine? It could be that before they come to your session, no, there are routines that you establish the routine. For example, before they sit down, they probably would be wiping the table. They would clean, or they would uh, wash their hands before they touch anything, or they must have taken their breakfast before they sit down to your class or what. So whatever routine that you would like them to follow, establish that, and again, religiously follow up on your kids how they would be following the routine, or how they go through the routine. Always encourage your kids to follow routines. And if sometimes these are kids and even high schoolers, they are older than elementary students, but even given their age, they can sometimes falter in terms of following routine. So we just remind, and we don't have to be very emotional about it. We don't have to yell at them for not following. Just remind them, so that as time goes by, it will become their second nature. Okay, second nature, like what is our second nature now in this time of crisis? Washing of hands, wearing of masks, that's already our second nature. Without other people telling us, it becomes automatic. It's the same thing with routines. If it is persistently done, and if you keep on following up your kids on how they would do the routines, then it becomes a second nature to them. Okay. At first, it's kind of really tedious, because sometimes you find yourself at the end of the rope. You are already what do you call this? You're mad at times because they could not follow. But just keep on going, and things will be better. Okay, right. So it will also help if you have like the things to do for kids, so that they will not forget. Okay, because even if you have established some rules, you have activities for them to do, but uh, sometimes they tend to forget, or sometimes they choose to forget. And so when those things happen, you just remind them, and having the checklist would help them. No, they just tick off the activity that they completed, so that by themselves they can already check whether they have accomplished the things that you expect them to do. Okay, right. So you can have activity lists like this. That's up to you. You can create your own activity list. Again, depending on your schedule, depending on your availability as a facilitator of learning. All right. So where are we? So next is, hold on, huh? Probably I jumped. Okay. Okay. So we were on C, no? Create a schedule. We are now on H. So what is this H? Help learners maintain focus. Now, if you are a full-time mother and you are facilitating learning, you are a full-time mother at the same time a teacher, but you don't necessarily, you don't need to be a teacher to facilitate learning in homeschooling. Okay, because there are other parents who do not have education background, but they attended trainings on how to go about homeschooling. So uh, you help learners maintain focus. So at home, if you are a mother of three, that's another story. If you're a mother of two or four or more, okay, so there are variations there, no, in terms of maintaining focus in your learners. So, for example, you have three kids and one is homeschooled, the two are still young. You can have lots of distractions in the house. So, what you can do with your child who is homeschooled is help that child or that learner maintain focus. There's a beautiful poem that I got from the internet, and it's coming from, it's taken from McGuffey Primer book. It's a nice poem. It says, "Work while you work, play while you play, one thing each time, that is the way. All that you do, do with your might. Things done by halves are not done right." So, very simple poem, but this actually is directed to maintaining focus. In other words, not jumping from one task to another. So this is what I told you. Whenever you start your homeschooling, you can tell your child to put away the gadget because that can be a distractor. Instead of focusing on adding numbers, the child can be distracted by the texts messages that are coming in. So uh, instill that in the students or in your children that while they are working on a certain thing, they have to focus on that particular thing, zero in on that aspect, and have time for this other aspect later. Okay, so emphasize that one. As a mother, also, or as a father, um, we have lots of concerns, no, at home. So if you are facilitating learning, that's the reason why I asked earlier, how are you? How am I? No? How capable am I in facilitating learning? Because if you facilitate learning and you yourself has lots of distractions in you or have lots of concerns, you cannot also focus. Okay? For example, you are teaching your child about grammar. This is English now. You have to devote your time for the session. You cannot be distracted. You cannot be teaching rules in subject verb agreement, and then after 5 minutes you are already in the laundry area doing it, and you just uh, checking your child from time to time, and there's no focus. So devote your time for the session. If you think that you have this X number of minutes to devote on a certain aspect or a certain concept that you will teach the child, then sit down and focus so that the child will not also be distracted. So if you have a small child, for example, take care of, so you ask somebody to take care of that child instead of you having that child crying on your lap while you are teaching your other child. Okay. Now here, prepare if you are facilitating learning, prepare for the session. Okay? If the lesson is this and that, you must have prepared yourself for the lesson because surely, how can you facilitate learning if you are not ready or if you do not know that lesson in the first place? Okay? By preparing for the session, if there are some gray points or gray areas in the concept that's being presented or that's supposed to be learned by the students, then if you have prepared yourself, you can ask help from others ahead of time so that when the session comes, you are ready for it. Okay? Next is break down into simple terms the learner's task. What do you mean by that? For example, if you are implementing a module that is given by the teacher of your grade 3 or grade 4 child, if you think that this much or this schedule that is given by the teacher or that is prescribed by the module is too much for your child, then don't force the issue. Break it down. What is important is the little learning that they get. So again, not many but much. Okay, meaning even if it's just a little learning, okay, celebrate in those little learnings instead of covering so many but you have not uh, affected understanding on your child. So you decide as a mother or as a father or as a parent, decide how is this module working? Is this too much? If it's um, too simple, then you can actually add more if you are capable of adding more. Okay, next up is we are done with H. Okay, we will now go to O in schools. What is O? Opt for doable goals. Okay, so again here, going back to the module that you might implement, okay, when classes open, online classes or modular classes open. So when we say doable goals, if do not go for ambitious goals. Goals can be broken down into daily, weekly, or monthly. So on a daily basis, check on the doable goals. You know what your child is capable of doing, and you know the level of your child. So if you think that the material that's given for that day or which is prescribed for that day is too much for your child, then do not force your child to finish it. Okay, be patient. There are other sessions which can be devoted for the completion of the task anyway. So by now you know already your kids, you know the strengths and weaknesses of your kids. So if you think that your child is um, not a visual learner, okay, then or not a, the orientation of your child is not really into visual because the child is more on auditory, then you go for activities which will support the strengths of your child. Okay, and do not go for things which your child will have difficulty dealing with. Okay, so that's it. So know the strengths and weaknesses of your child. All right, so here I said if the learner's work is done like in a short period of time because it is too easy for the learner or for your child, when you sense it, then you can add more activities, okay, in order to challenge or in order to facilitate increased learning or increased understanding on your child. Okay, then we're done with the second O now. Okay, the second O is observe consistency. Okay, so this is very important. If we want to discipline our children or our students, we have to observe consistency. So here, at school or at homeschool, the child should be taught the importance of speaking and behaving in a proper manner. And appropriate corrections need to be meted out if behavior is unsatisfactory. So, for example, dealing with if you have established in our first set rules, homeschool rules. If you have set homeschool rules, and one of the rules there is for them to speak in English, so that you will be teaching them fluency. Okay, if for example they are code switching in the process, then you correct them. Okay, and that correction must be consistent. It's not because this time you are being happy and being so considerate that even if they code switch, things will just be okay. There is no consistency there. So when we say consistency, the act should be done, or if it is misbehavior, it should be called out, okay, consistently. It should not be dependent on your mood as a parent. There are times when we as parents would be kind of lenient, and there are times when we are firmer or permissive. So let's check ourselves. Um, are we being consistent with the rules? Are we allowing it sometimes and not allowing it in other times? So if we are not being consistent with our rules, then we are also affecting confusion in our students or in our children. They get confused. Ano ba talaga? What is it really? Okay? So, the law of consistency. Motivation gets you going, discipline keeps you growing. Okay. Classroom discipline programs and parent education programs must be consistent. Now, when the modules are out for public schools, okay, for sure there will be communications between the teacher and the parents. So it should be the words of the teacher must be consistent with the parents. Okay. When we talk about consistency, it is not that teacher considers this while mom doesn't, or teacher considers this and dad doesn't. So there should be consistency in what you want your child to learn. So that consistency calls for parents, teachers, child care providers to work together to provide a secure, consistent environment for children. Okay, so consistency. Next up is we already, oh, sorry, we were done with, what's wrong here? Okay, so we were done with schools, SCHOO. Okay, then we are now on, we're done with this, right? Yes, okay, hold on. So we are now on the L. Leverage on available technologies and other resources at home. Um, you know the kind of learners that you have now. They are more into technology. They are, if you notice your learners, they are so exposed to technology. They know a lot of things about online games, about how to manipulate gadgets and all that. So in other words, their interest is into technology. So our, if it is if our setting allows it, then if you have technology, if you have computer, if you have gadgets, then make use of those gadgets in teaching, okay, or in facilitating learning in your homes. So for example, there are technologies that you can use. You can use YouTube for your child to listen to, okay. If you are teaching, for example, reading, beginning reading to your daughter or your son, and you think that you have limitations in terms of oral production, you can make use of YouTube. There are lots of videos there which will help you in teaching your kids how to say or how to produce the sounds. There are also songs. There are stories that you can use online, which will be of interest to your child. Okay, and what about other resources? Oh, this brings me now to variation. Going back to the schedule that you would create. So in your schedule also, it should be something that's inclusive of fun. You should not focus your schedule on very academic stuff. inject fun in there. Fun like when the situation allows, you probably can take your child to a park, okay, for their, for example, science science lessons, instead of them being stuck in the house and looking at books. No? But you can also use technologies which will also take them to a tour, a virtual tour, or a virtual explanation of how things are done, okay, which will aid you in teaching them concepts. Again, as parents, we have limitations, but we can extend, or we can address our limitations by making use of available resources, available technologies, in order that we can really help our child grasp so many things and understand so many things. All right, moving on. We are now on the last letter, which is S. Okay, so simplify consequences. Remember earlier when I defined, when we had a definition of discipline, there was the word punishment, which I highlighted in red. I do not want to look at it and that way, because it has a negative connotation. So here, in simplifying consequences, I mentioned earlier that even if you have set rules, even if you have set routines for your children to follow, there are really times when they go out of their way and simply defy rules. Okay, so when they do that, when that happens, then there will be consequences. Some people call it punishment. Okay, so there are consequences to their actions. So I would say the consequences that you will offer, or you will give to your children, would be simple, not really something that's so big and so life changing. Like for example, if your rule is for them to put away their gadgets, and there was a session when they had their tablets on the table while you are teaching math, then it would not be a simple consequence when you tell your child, you will never be able to use this gadget, and like forever you will not have access to this gadget. That's too much. Probably you can just reduce the number of hours or minutes for screen time, and that's simple. It is enough for them to be taught that it's it's a rule that they defied, and therefore they are getting that consequence. Okay. Oh, by the way, going back to rules, for consequences also, you can negotiate. You can actually get the opinion of your children as to what consequences they will be getting if they violate a certain homeschool rule. So in that way, you're partnering with your child, and it's like them owning that decision. So you say, for example, if you continue to put your gadget on the table, if you violate that rule of putting gadget on the table, then you will have reduced number of hours for screen time, because there are parents who are having you who provide screen time for their kids. So uh, ask them, is 30 minutes reduction or an hour reduction fair, while you are establishing rules. So you can have that conversation with your child, okay? So that, again, there are rules, but they are amenable to the rules, and they own it because they have their voice in the consequences that can be given should they defy the rules. So you are teaching democracy there in the process. No? There's a democratic process. Okay. So what I'd like to advocate is positive discipline. Okay, positive educational discipline, and this is I've read this one by Marichu Bellarmino in 2015. Positive discipline is an approach that teaches children and guides their behavior while respecting their rights. This is the kind of discipline that we as parents and teachers must follow, not the discipline that most of us grew up with. Like recalling in the previous, in my experiences with discipline, it was corporal punishment that was popular during our time. And so we grew up fearing or being scared of violating the rule because of this punishment. But I'd like to talk a little more about positive discipline in this session. Okay, so what are the characteristics of positive discipline? So positive discipline, one is it is non-violent and it is respectful of the child as a learner. So going back to what I mentioned earlier about including or hearing the voice of the child in having consequences for their actions, this is respecting of their being as a learner. So if you include them, okay, in figuring out what consequence will be for the violation or for the infraction of a rule that they have done, then that is respecting their being. Okay. Another characteristic of positive discipline is about finding long-term solutions that develop children's own self-discipline. Okay, so if you are doing something which is developing their own self-discipline, then that is positive discipline. Okay. Another is it involves clear communication of parents' expectations, rules, and limits. Remember the S in set up rules or set homeschool rules. So this is it's really geared towards positive discipline. So you involve clear communication of your expectations. What are you expecting from them? What are the rules and what are the limits? Next, builds a mutually respectful relationship between the parent and the child. I have mentioned that already. And teaches children lifelong skills. What are these lifelong skills? For example, these these lifelong skills that we are talking about is we are looking at their capability now to live life after school when they become adults. Do they have the social skills? Do they know how to respect elders? Do they know how to respect the law? Okay, so things like that. Next would be increases children's competence and confidence to handle challenging situations. And teaches courtesy, nonviolence, empathy, self-respect, human rights, and respect for others. So if we are noting of those schools that I shared with you, which are geared towards positive discipline, then we are teaching our learners these values: empathy, self-respect, human rights, and respect for others. All right, so what are the tools and concepts of positive discipline? The first one is mutual respect. You respect the child and the child will respect you. Okay. The second is identifying the belief behind the behavior. If the child, for example, is throwing tantrums while you are beginning to have your lesson, identify or go into figure out the belief behind that behavior. Why is the child throwing tantrums? Probably the learning environment is too warm, or probably the child is hungry, or probably the child is not feeling well. Okay, so instead of hitting the child for behaving that way, you identify the belief behind the behavior. Next is effective communication and problem solving skills. Well, I don't have to explain that, that's self-explanatory. So you go in positive discipline, you go for the discipline that teaches. So we call it, that's why we call it educational discipline. It will teach them It will teach them not only to perform a task given for the day, but it will teach them for life, for lifelong. It will lead them to acquire those lifelong skills. Focusing on solutions instead of punishment. Okay, so when something goes wrong, you don't need to resort right away to punishment, but you can go for solutions. Okay, in order to address the concern. And encouragement is one tool for positive discipline. What is this encouragement? For example, the child would prefer to answer only numbers 1 to 6 instead of completing the numbers 1 to 10. And you would encourage the child to go and continue answering the remaining items with your assistance, okay, with you at the side helping the child. Okay, it could be that the child is not finishing the task because it is too tough or too difficult for the child to understand, so that's where you will come in and assist the child or help your child in really completing the task. All right, so these are the positive child outcomes associated with non-harsh discipline. So, gone are the days when we would really discipline our child by hitting. That's corporal punishment, right? So, when you are non-harsh in disciplining your kids, then your kids will grow up having higher self-regulation. What does that mean? That means that they will be in control now of their emotions. They can manage their emotions, okay? And they are more, they have more competent behaviors, and they have positive social relationships, okay? So what happens now if they have harsh discipline? These are the results, okay? So the child will have aggression, and the child will be externalizing problems. The child will be antisocial or delinquent, or will be having delinquent behavior, and they will have poor psychological adjustment associated with parental rejection and hostility. So if they are, for example, being hit at home uh, for the infractions that they have made with the rules, that is harsh discipline, then they are most likely, studies would show that they are most likely to hit others too, because that's what they grew up with. So we do not want that. So that's why we go for positive discipline. So in a nutshell, there are 3 players in homeschool discipline. You as a parent, whether you're a teacher or not, okay, you might be a father, you might be a mother, okay, an aunt, uncle, what have you. You have the learner and the process, okay? And mind you, discipline is rarely enjoyable, but almost always it is profitable. Okay, that's according to Darren Parry. Okay, now remember schools. Okay, so SCHOOLS, set homeschool rules and clear expectations. C for create a homeschool schedule. H, help learners maintain focus. O, offer doable goals. O, observe consistency. L, leverage on available technologies and other resources at home. S, simplify consequences. Okay, so when you think of educational discipline, in general terms, think of schools. And remember that discipline is the bridge between the goals and accomplishment. That's according to Jim Rohn, an inspirational speaker. So with that, thank you very much for being with me this afternoon. I hope there is something that you have picked up from my talk, and my pleasure really to speak with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much po, Dr. Marcelita, and to all our viewers for this afternoon. Ma'am, we just have some few questions here na pwede po nating i-answer about the session. Okay po, I'll be reading the questions, ma'am. First question po is from Miss Rexy and Verga. Question po, paano po pag need ng punishment ang pupil? Meron po ba tayong mga means of implementing discipline? Sino po ang magpapataw? Yan po daw.
Okay. All right. So, ma'am, yes, if there is really a need, of course, our judgment as parents, alam natin na itong behavior na ito must be corrected, must be modified. And so we need to implement punishment. But again, it should not be harsh. By harsh, I don't mean the physical discipline, like the corporal punishment. What we can do is really process with the child, like, why did you do this? Don't you know that you are supposed to do this? Why did you do otherwise? And again, maintain that communication with the child in the process of in processing your child's behavior. Identify what's the root of the behavior. Bakit ganun? Bakit nangyayari yun? Anong problema? No? And then try to work with the child on how or what appropriate solution you can come up with in order that that behavior will be modified. But it should be pointed out to the child. You do not just say, okay lang yon and let it pass, you know, okay lang yun, mawawala din yun, mga ganyan, or makakalimutan. No, you have to correct knowing that this behavior is not really acceptable. It has to be corrected because remember, we are preparing the child for the real world. So if we do not correct the child in our homes, then the child will go out of the community or go out of the society incapable of doing what is right, and that will create problems. So what's important is talk to the child and correct the child. Okay, ang ginagamit niyan usually talagang i-one-on-one mo. And when you correct behavior, by the way, when you correct behavior, do that in private. For example, no, ito sa mga toddlers, no, di ba sometimes in grocery stores, di ba mag-throw sila ng tantrums? Pag may mga gusto, ganyan, tapos they throw tantrums. What you would do is you would pause on what you're doing and take the child somewhere where you can talk and process the behavior with your child in private. Do not, however young your child is, do not subject your child to shaming in public. So that's really no, that's, remember, mutual respect. Okay, so when you have processed the emotion of the child, then that's when you can come back to, for example, in the grocery store, pag tapos nang na-proseso mo siya, then you come back sa ano yung ginagawa mo. Okay, basta do it in private. Okay, I hope I answered your question. And by the way,
Okay.
no, again, let me just emphasize again, when our children or when our learners are displaying behaviors which are not acceptable, let us take out ourselves. Yun kaya ko in-identify kanina yon in my early slide, yung how capable am I in facilitating learning, kasi sometimes our emotions come into play. We take things personally. We take it as an attack upon ourselves. So take your emotional aspect out, so that you will not be emotionally laden when you deal with the situation.
Okay po, ma'am. Thank you po. Next question po natin, ma'am. This is from Miss Geraldine P. Cardenas. Isn't it too late to apply positive discipline for the grade 8, 9, or 10 students? If not, how can we begin to do so?
It's never too late. I mean, any positive thing that you will impose, or any positive thing that you will use, it's never too late, because ito naman lifelong learning naman tayo, di ba? So, if the child is used to uh, corporal punishment, probably based on his or her background, because the family is implementing that or doing that, and you as a school agent, as a teacher, would implement positive discipline, at least the child will see that there is something new or there is something positive that he or she sees in school. And by then, the child would be able to modify his behavior. So it's I don't think it's too late. It's never too. And what's important also is when you have like in your school, probably you have student handbook, no? So if they are too unruly and they are really beyond your handling, there are situations in which it's the situation is really beyond us. We cannot control. Well, you have prefect of students or somebody, an authority in your school who can help you in dealing with the behavior of the child. But if it's something manageable, we try to use positive discipline. Ang bottom line lang naman ng positive discipline is humanism. Diba? You treat the person as a human being. And human being having emotions. Ganun. So, you what would be a positive and pleasant action can be met with positive results. So, ganun lang yun. Any more?
Yes po, ma'am. Okay, next question po natin from Mr. Raymond Flores. Just wanna ask po if it is advisable to give some rewards to the child if he or she was able to comply all the tasks for the day.
Yes. Oh, yes. A very good question. No? Yes, we do that, especially for the kids. No? Even the high schoolers. I remember when I was teaching in the high school. These are fourth year high school dati, no? This is 2005, 2010. Even high schoolers, they are still amazed with rewards. So the rewards that you can give will be dependent on what level of students you have. If you have graders, ibang rewards ang sa kanila. For high school, let me just share before when I taught fourth year high school, the rewards that I gave, we had badges, no? And color coded yung badges na I offered. Like if you get a badge which is colored red, that's 10 points. Colored blue, 15. Colored yellow, 20. Basta I just assigned points to a certain color of a badge. And they have to collect those badges. And when do they get a badge? For example, they perfect a quiz or they perfected a long test. Then they get a badge for that. When they have accumulated an X number of uh, badges or points, then they can be exempt from another quiz, mga ganan, or they can be exempt from a long quiz. That's my reward to them. And that reinforces now a good behavior that, you give them an idea that if they do well, then they would be easing up on some activities because they get exempted. Mga ganon. Yes, really, rewards is good. That reinforces positive behavior.
Okay po, ma'am. And last question for this afternoon, we have this question from Mr. Arnold Castro. Question po, ma'am, as a teacher, what is the most effective positive discipline that you can suggest to us as parents?
Okay. Yung mga yung yung schools na sinasabi ko, no? Again, in general terms ko yung binigay kasi I do not know kasi who you will be dealing with. Is it prep ba, toddler ano ba, elementary ba, or high school ba? So, yung schools na binigay ko, yung set up rules, okay? Ano yon? So, schools, di ba? Set up rules, homeschool rules and clear expectations, create schedule, help your kids to maintain focus, opt for doable goals, observe consistency, leverage on technologies and other homeschool resources, and S is simplify consequences. Yun po ang bear those in mind. And as to the specificity of each letter, that's for you to figure out depending on the kind of setting or depending on the kind of learners that you are homeschooling.
Okay po, ma'am. So as much as we want to accommodate all the questions po, we're already running out of time. So ma'am, any last reminders for our viewers this afternoon?
Okay, so let me just thank Miss Kia for facilitating this YouTube live. And thank you very much, Vibal Group, for this. And we are very thankful that even with this crisis that we are stuck in our homes, we are still learning and we are still provided with an expansive learning from different speakers by Vibal Group. So thank you very much. And to our viewers also, if you need trainings, if you need reviews, you may want to visit MJL Review and Training Services, which I own, and we provide trainings and reviews not only for those who are wanting to take English proficiency tests, but also for organizations who need trainings on anything about your organization. You may contact. I have here my. Do we still have it? The email address, Miss Kia, no? The last slide that I showed you. You may contact. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you very much for your time and have a pleasant afternoon, everyone.
Okay po. Thank you very much din po, Doc Marcelita Handayan Labial, for this very wonderful and inspiring session that you had with us. And of course, to all our regular viewers here on our webinar series, we would like to thank you. And we are hoping to see you to the next two sessions we would be having tomorrow and on Friday. Once again, thank you very much. Good afternoon at mag-iingat tayong lahat mga kabibal.